Hi, today we're going to finish these little ornaments. So right now they're leather hard, and yes, they still kind of look a little dorky, but you have to envision what they're going to be like later on when they're finished. So we're going to trim this up, and we can do this multiple ways. We can just trim them rounded. I can put a little strap handle around to kind of have it, to hang it up. I could put a little goober on the top with a hole after I've got it all trimmed and make it, functional. But for practice sake, and also I think they look kind of fancy, is we're going to throw a knob on here and we're going to use that for the hanger. And throwing knobs directly on the forms are so good a practice. I find they're, anytime you get to practice these kind of things, do it because, it's so much more, well, it's faster, but it's also, I find that it makes for a much nicer relationship between the knob and the pot if you actually throw it directly on, as opposed to, like, say, throwing it separately and sticking it on, or or trimming it out of the form, because I find that they look a little forced. Sometimes they don't relate very well. And anyway, so we're going to throw a knob directly on the form. It is a little trickier than, say, putting a strap handle on, so that, but it's well worth the practice. I'm not saying that these are easy, but the more you push yourself and push your throwing skills to do these things, then you're never going to get good if you don't good at those things unless you actually actively try them, which means that you may have some failures on the way. But it's not tremendously difficult. It's just that it's, kind of a little more challenging for beginners. So we'll give that a shot today. And we're going to throw on these wonderful pain in the ass chucks. There's a chuck again. So we're going to get these supported, okay, like that. All right. And so here we have those little, remember I put these little lines in? I mean, we could actually take a little level and stick it on the top and kind of like level a little bubble. That works. But just for ease, you can kind of see when you spin the wheel. Let me get this a little more in center here. You can see that line going up and down, up and down. So I have, again, oops, I have my handy, mirror here. So I have that positioned in front of my wheel so that I can actually see that going up and down when I'm looking at it side on. You can probably see that with the camera. But if you're looking straight down, from my point of view, I can't really see that wobble in there as much. So what we're going to do is have a look at that and see where it's dipping down, and then just adjust it. And the idea is to get that level so that your little finial and your little knob that hangs it up are going to be, not in line with each other, so that they don't hang crooked. So, and then once I get that mostly level, then I need to center the chuck. So I generally tap on center, which I just kind of pick a point that's centered, or that I want to center, and I just tap it and it slides into that place. That can take quite a long time to learn. Again, it's just repetition. But you can just use your finger, and what I'm doing is just watching the gap between my finger and the pot. So I'm just pretending this chuck and the pot are all one thing. And I am just watching that gap. And every time it comes towards me and closes that gap, I'm going to push it away so that I can kind of get this centered back on the wheel. So I get it a little bit close, but then I can double check with this too, because see how that's still dipping down? Sometimes it's hard to kind of see that when the chuck is a little bit off too. So let's go fix that. Or I may have just knocked it off a little bit when I was getting the chuck centered, tapping it. So that actually looks fairly level. There's a little dip there. I mean, you can fart around with it as much as you want. It doesn't have to be absolutely absolutely perfect. Nobody's going to have it spinning on their Christmas. Well, maybe you might have it spinning on your Christmas tree. There's all those weird little things that Christmas tree spinners. Well, maybe we really need to work on getting this perfect for those odd times that your ornament's going to be literally spinning on the Christmas tree with those cool motorized things that make things turn. So, oops, nope, get that centered. Just going to check the pot here, make sure it's close enough. And this one's becoming a problem. And make sure that's centered enough. So that looks good. Now, attaching it to the chuck. So this chuck is porous because we just misfired it. So when you're trying to attach the clay lugs to this, it doesn't stick tremendously well. So sometimes what I'll do, if I'm on the ball, I'll throw my chuck into a little container of water, wet them, and just soak it for a little bit so that it gets saturated with water a bit. Or what you can do is wet your chuck. So that will kind of help get the clay to cling to it. I suppose you could high fire them so that they're not porous, but sometimes if they're really not porous, then you can't get the lugs off. So there's a balance between having it sticky enough that you can, get your lugs to stay, and also, be able to get it off afterward. So I'm going to affix my pot to the chuck, and then I'm going to affix the chuck to the wheel. Or you do it the other way around, doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that both things are on there. Now, the problem with doing anything on a chuck is that it's really not that stable. You've got a higher center of gravity, so it's like very narrow. Sometimes these lugs don't stay on tremendously well. So when I'm trimming on the chuck, I try to hold my piece down if I can, or I'm very careful. You can see I've got my hand here on this other side. I do that just for insurance. So if this does come not attached, unattached from the chuck, I can grab it. So this is my fail. This is like insurance that nothing, when something happens bad, which it will most likely jump out of the lugs, then I can catch it. Now, what I'm doing here now is just trimming all of the lumps and bumps off that were a bit uneven at the top when I cut it off. And that can grab. So that's kind of why I'm going slow. I'm not putting a huge amount of pressure on this. I'm just trying to get all that uneven stuff off that my tool can kind of catch on at this point, because I don't want to have any disasters. Once I feel like there's nothing, hanging out off-centered that could catch, then I can be a little more aggressive with the trimming. And you can kind of see that my chuck is kind of jumping out a little bit. This one has come loose. So I'm just going to press this a little bit higher up on the pot so that I don't have anything bad coming out. It's not very stable. So then I'm just going to start removing some of that material that's extra that I left for a little handle to get it off so that it wouldn't squish when I picked it up off the hump. So got it all nicely trimmed. Now I've just got basically I just roughed it out, got the nice bulk of it off, starting to kind of get that nice rounded shape. And then I'm going to take a little wider tool so that I can lay it on the side so that I can kind of smooth all those little ridges out. Okay, so you can kind of see where that ridge is that I had in there to make sure it was level in the chuck. I'm just going to maybe play a little bit make that a little more pronounced. And then I'll take the rest here and smooth it off. Now I'm not trimming absolutely everything. I'm just kind of getting that, mostly that shape roughed out. I don't want to overly thin that out because I'm going to put pressure on the top of that when I throw the knob. And I may refine that a little bit later. But what I want to have here in the top is I want to have a nice point, or, you know, so that when I put the knob, the clay on there, I don't have to worry about air pockets kind of getting in. It's just a little bit nicer to have this rounded or flat. If it's scooped in, you know, you get a little bit more careful about how you attach the clay the next time. So you notice that's where I poked it for the hole to release the air as it was drying. I'm going to cover that hole back up when I'm throwing the knob. So I will have to put another hole elsewhere unless I carve this and, you know, maybe put some piercings through the ornament for decoration. If it's going to stay hollow and enclosed, then I'll have to put another hole in afterward. But in the meantime, I'm going to take a little bit of clay, and this is quite soft. So this is fresh clay out of the bag. So don't use the hard bits that you've been using for trimming. Use a nice soft piece, because you don't really want to, you know, have to force this too much, because it is sitting in the chuck kind of gingerly. And yes, they look dorky. Whoop, I lost my ball. Again, dorky. This is all about dorkiness. They always look weird when you first put them on. I would go and make a chunk of clay bigger than you want the finished thing to be, just slightly bigger, because you're going to lose a little bit of clay when you're centering. And then you need to score this when we're attaching it. So I have a rib that's got teeth on it, so it's serrated. And I typically don't add slip. I actually just wet my scoring tool and rough it up, and you just kind of wet it and kind of run it over it. And what happens, it just makes the slip right on the surface, and generally gives you just the perfect amount of slip instead of having to, add too much to it after the fact. And then this ball clay is pretty soft. Typically I would score both sides, but I'm going to really compress this. And so I've been able to get away with it with no trouble with not scoring this side. If you're concerned, you could always do a little bit of scoring. I find that if you have them really wet, both sides, it's hard to get your knob to actually stay on. It's like just slides everywhere. So I'm just taking my thumb and my finger and pushing it onto the form. If you find that this is a bit delicate, you can also take your potter's thumb and do this. And so I'm just kind of taking the clay from the knob and just pushing it over top of the body of my ornament. So I do the same thing if I'm doing a casserole dish knob or a teapot knob. So at this point, this is where the trickiness comes into play, where most students have a hard time, is that they put way too much water on it. So if you kind of, we're used to just like squeezing water on the pot and then throwing. If you do that with this, is that all the water is going to drain down, and in the chuck especially, it's going to like go in underneath here. It's going to basically fuse these little lugs onto your pot. If you were throwing a casserole lid, all the water would go in the crack where the lid is sitting on your pot, and then it's going to be really hard to get your lid off. Like, it's just a bit of a pain. So what I do is I just take a damp sponge and I just run it on the surface as I'm centering, and I don't add extra water elsewhere. So this is not like soppy wet. I just kind of squeeze some of the water out of it, and I'm holding it against the surface. And then my tips of my fingers are wet here. So it's kind of lubricating just enough, but not enough to kind of pour over the ornament. So all I'm doing is holding it and pinching in and pushing down and trying to center it. I'm putting a little bit of downward pressure on the knob, but if you can see, I usually, when I do that, I put my fingers here to kind of take some of that pressure off. So I'm taking my sponge and pushing downward. That's to make sure that it's really well attached and help in the centering process. But you know, but these are pretty robust, these ornaments, because they're very small and they kind of curve and come to a point. So they don't, as long as they're not too thin, you know, I don't have any risk of collapsing. But you can imagine if I was trying to do this on a big, say, casserole dish lid, you know, on a huge span, maybe if it was a little bit thin, you know, that pressure is going to put stress on that lid. So this kind of takes a bit of the pressure off when you kind of do this, and then you can press down and that holds it. So that's pretty close to centered. You can take some of that uncentered stuff, clay, around the base and bring it up. I find that it's not worth trying to fight to get everything perfect on a knob like this. So if you have some uncentered clay here that's a little lumpy, just take a potter's thumb or a rib and just scrape it off. That's perfectly fine too. It's not really anything major. And then I'm going to cone. Okay, oh, a little cone. And you can even pinch off the uncentered stuff too. Now, I don't know what I'm going to do here for the knob. This is what's really fun to play with, is that I could just put a little groove in here. I can put a little groove in here and play with this. Maybe the hole for the hanger would be in here. Maybe I would bring this back down and make it a bit wider. And again, you see what I've got here? I've got my fingers here as I'm pushing down. Make a little button type knob, okay? That doesn't look fancy enough for the ornament, so let's see. Let's bring that in and we'll do like more of a triangle shape. But this is what's fun about throwing knobs, is that you can play with the shape. And if this is on a casserole dish or a teapot, you can kind of really see how that particular shape of knob works with the pot instantly. It's a little harder when you're doing ornaments and the rest of it is underneath, under here, and you've kind of masked it a bit. But generally, it's still far easier to see what it's going to look like. So then, well, let's see. Take my potter's thumb. Actually, I don't know where I put it. Where the heck did my potter's thumb go? I dropped it. Oh, is it on the floor? Let me grab it. So I find these are really handy for detailing knobs and things. So I can use that, and I can scrape a little corner, make it a little rounded. I can make a little spiral on the top. Ooh, I like that. Oh, wait a second. Gooey. Porcelain is gooey. There we go. And just recenter that. And I can make it feel fancy. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. But this is really your opportunity to play. There's no rules with these. I think more is more in a case of ornaments. And all right, so we got a little knob there. That looks okay. So now what I'm going to do, just center this a little bit better. Make sure that's good. Now, I like, again, little break points. We talked about those when we threw the ornaments. I really like them where the form changes. And often, I like to show where the knob is attached. So I just take my fancy rib here, back to smoothing off the extra water on the shoulder, and bring the rib up. But then I just take the corner of my rib and just push into the knob. So you make a little break point. Just kind of showcases the knob. It gives a nice little place for the glaze to kind of change colors, to delineate maybe I want to have that knob black or something, and then the rest of the pot blue or the ornament blue, whatever. And then I'm just going to smooth that shoulder off. The other thing I can do is once that's dry, because I'm basically, working at leather hard clay here, is I can also trim that now that this is all finished. I can go back and get a little higher ridge here. I can take the tip of my finger. You just have to be careful that these little strings don't stick back onto your wet knob. But you can kind of also trim that out a little bit. Oop. And then blend that out. I usually just stop my wheel so that doesn't go flying. There we go. Ta-da. Now, soften a little bit. Maybe want a little more detail here, just to jazz it up a little more. Then I can take the tip of this. Let's see. Ooh, it's an ornament after all. Let's bling her up. Oop. Now it's a little bit wet, so it's sticky a bit, so you have to be careful. Oop. And I'll just smooth that out. There. Something. So that's it. Now, hole. So I just had a nail hanging around. I wanted a hole that was big enough that I could put a wire in or piece of yarn or string. Nothing that I'd have to like thread a needle on. So I wanted a fairly large hole. And I just found that this was a nice diameter. It's just all I had. So you just have to find something that is the right diameter of the hole that you want to poke it. But because this is really soft, so it's too soft to poke this in. This knob will fall over. It is also, if this was leather hard, it would be too hard, definitely, to poke. You'd have to use a hole maker that's sharp on the end, and I find that they're a little bit too big for a hole for an ornament. So I've got my heat gun from Princess Auto, and what I'm going to do is glass this just for a few seconds. You can time it if you want. I don't want to make this knob so dry that it turns white. I'm just kind of stiffening it up a little bit. That's good. So what did that, like 15 seconds? Not a lot. And then I'm going to poke the hole in it so it's still soft. Now, I didn't want this to not hang properly either. Again, I'm using my mirror because when I'm using my mirror, I can actually see if this is level. I don't want to poke it kind of on an angle. So I'm going to thread it in, get my nail level, and then make sure I'm poking it across the middle, and then go in, ta-da, and skewer it in. Make sure that that's fairly level. And when I push that in, of course, there's debris from the hole on the tip, and I usually clean that off before I pull it back out again, because I just drag that goo back through the hole. So usually this side is pretty good, but then the other side, you get that rough bit. So I usually just bring the nail back in and kind of go along the other side and work that way through. Again, clean the end of the nail and go back through. And then usually you can just take a finger or a damp sponge and just kind of smooth around the hole to make that hole a little nicer. Now, the other thing to do, oh, cat's back, hey Millie, is, find my tool, sorry. When you're hanging this wire, I don't know if you can see that, what I didn't want to have is the wire to go up, and especially if this is wider, and around and up again. I wanted it to just hang straight. So what I do is I just take the edge of a tool, and right in the center of that hole, I'm going to notch it. You can also squish it and notch aside. Okay, so that it gives the wire a nice place to kind of go up to hang. It looks kind of cool with two, and I think that would be fine, but I'm going to get a little fancy, and I'm just going to work that into the design. I'm going to go the opposite direction too. Kind of makes a bit of a flower on the top. I'll show you in a sec. Oop, I just stuck my finger in that. Smooth that hole again. So the knob is still really quite soft, but we'll just be a little careful. There we go. Now the other thing I like to do is I like to put the hole in at this time while it's still soft, because if I push it through and kind of tip the knob over and make it not level, I can kind of recenter that a little bit or position it while it's still soft without any kind of issues haunting me again. So I'm going to take the little lugs off here. You see the top? Isn't that cute? And then that way it also kind of gives a place for the wire. So there's my little ornament. They don't look so dorky. We can hang them up. Now, the fun part is the finishing. And we'll talk about all the cool things you could do. Like, honestly, anybody, you know, whatever your jam is, you can kind of glaze these or decorate them. It's a nice canvas to play with. So, you know, I would let this dry to leather hard a little bit before I start playing with it, because knowing me, I'm going to ding it. But you can, I could put nice band of slip or underglaze in there and carve all kinds of things on it. I can cut chunks out of it and make it like a hammered metal kind of look, stripes, like I can carve the heck out of this, and it'll be so much fun. I can slip trail. So all the gooey stuff that you get from your splash pan, I save that, and I use a hand mixer to mix it up, and I strain it through a strainer, make sure there's no lumps. And then I have a really nice trailing thing. You can trail on them. You could put studs, you know, and then you have a nice relief of things. You know, you can really play with those. And the nice thing about trailing is that if you don't like it, you just like, whoop, all right, I'm gonna do it again, which is really kind of nice. You can put people's names on it with the trails. You can, so I raku fired some of these. The biggest thing is trying to figure out how you're going to glaze them, because you can't sit them on the kiln. So sometimes I'll make a little stand for them to sit on. So again, you can throw off the hump. And you could just throw, when you're throwing these, throw a few little rings, or you could even hand build, you know, hand build a ring. It doesn't take a lot of time, right? A little piece of clay, you could make a little koozie, you know, however high that you need, and make sure that it sits, you know, where you want it, and then bisque fire that when you're bisque firing this. And then when you're ready, then you would just not glaze this. And you can put a stain over there on that part, or underglaze. If you don't have stain or underglaze, even just like I could glaze the top and the bottoms and leave this bare and have a really nice slip decoration or whatever underglaze, and make it look shiny and matte. And I can fire them sideways too, right? So I don't have to necessarily have, you know, this could be the part that's unglazed, and these could be the glazed bits. When I raku fired them, I really like that black smoke surface, and I usually leave like the top and the bottom black smoke surface with the glaze, you know, nice crackle glaze or something on the body is really pretty. Or of course you can hang them. So you can get high temperature wire and you can hang them. I find for cone 6, it doesn't the wires don't hold up for a whole lot, so I try to avoid those wires because they're expensive, and to do that many it's kind of a pain. But if you're doing low temperature, it's not so bad. Or like in the raku kiln, I can hang them, and I just have 2 little stilts of the wire going through, and that's another reason why I have also a fairly large hole, because then you have to make sure that your wire will fit later on. But hopefully that helps. Let me just see. Just to give you an idea. Oh, and I could take my hole puncher and I could pierce things. Let's just quickly. I'll do a hammered kind of metal texture just with what I have right here. So you can look at my tool, at my trimming tool. All I'm going to do is take little chunks out of the clay and just layer them. It's really not that hard. You don't have to, be scared about carving. Sometimes the simplest things make the best texture. And, this anytime you're doing these kind of things, you're also taking off weight. So you can kind of see, and if I just do the whole thing, it'll look like kind of a hammered thing. The other thing I can do, finish that up after. The other thing I can do, is take your rib. If it's soft enough, so when it's really leather hard, you can't do this so much. But I can make little marks and push it in. Let's see if it's soft. Soft enough to push in. A little bit. So I'm going to go on opposite side of the holes here. I'm using my holes to kind of mark where that is. And it matches this too. Then I'll do that side. So if it's really soft, sometimes you get a nice bulge there. Depends on, if it's leather hard or soft leather hard. But even that, there's some more bling. Oh, I like that. So let's do this. You can push in right down to the bottom. Nope. If it's leather hard, sometimes you can crack them, so you can be a little careful. Let's do this. Got this carve now, but I kind of like to push it in. Maybe I'll carve it and push it in. Boop. Right is more when it comes to Christmas here. Christmas ornaments. But again, great practice for decorating. So I'm just pushing this in. And how pretty is that? Oh, ooh. Will it work with the hammered texture too? Might work with the hammered texture. I probably left a little gap here, but we'll do it anyway. We'll make it work. Now, what else do we need to do? It doesn't have to be difficult here. Oh, I lost I could take the tip of this and just make dots. And that will give some really nice texture for the glaze to kind of pool over. It really doesn't have to be difficult. Okay, and you just keep going. Maybe I'll have this side smooth and this side dotted. Okay. Oh, the fun you will have. Ta-da! Look, that's cool. Well, or what does it look like if they're all done? Okay, maybe I need to kind of, pull back a little bit. Maybe, let's see. Oh, maybe I'll just do around the edge here. See that? Leave that there. That might be cool. Let's try this side. They get, like I said, addictive, because then it's like, oh, what if I do this? Oh, what if I do that? And that's where the creativity happens. And it's so much fun. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Anyway, I hope you have fun making these. And I hope you learn lots. And I hope you, uh, I'd love to see them all finished. They'll be awesome. So you can kind of see. Maybe that's a little more simple and plain. Or maybe you want to go for the gold and have them really blingy. I'll show you a few of these when we're finished. Thanks again.